Hello and welcome to the Sterling Podcast. I'm Julia Williams, your host. And today we'll be diving into the world of family law. And I am thrilled to be joined by Laura Williams, who is an expert in her field, and she's from HCR Law. Now, Laura and her team really support families and individuals when it comes to some of life's most challenging transitions and experiences. But I know firsthand that they look for practical, people first solutions. So, Laura, welcome to the Sterling Podcast. How are you?
Very much, and thank you for having me. I'm well, thank you.
It's great to have you here. So, look, Laura, can you tell myself and some of the listeners, what is your role and, how do your team really support people?
Yeah, so I co-head the family team in Worcester, so that's my sort of day-to-day role, but I also head up the national ADR offering, which is all about trying to resolve disputes out of court. So we're trying to move more towards that as a national team, and as I say, I head up that element as well. So whilst we do the traditional family law advice and advising people through the court processes and also pre-protection, so things like prenups, cohabitation agreements, we're also really trying to move towards looking at other options for people that are a sort of less acrimonious way of dealing with things, and that's a real passion and priority of mine, certainly, but I think hopefully the rest of the team as well.
Well, and national as well, Laura. I mean, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? That you head that up as well. So, what do you deal with? What does your team deal with on a day-to-day basis, though? Just for the benefit of our listeners.
Yeah. Range of families really, and there's obviously a lot of different family setups these days. More often than not, people have either been married before or have prior relationships and perhaps have got children, half children, stepchildren. So really we assist in all families in when there is breakdown of a relationship. So that might be to deal with issues around where children are going to spend their time. It might be to do with how they're going to divide their finances. Sometimes wider family have also been involved in that, so they've loaned money or gifted money and they have to sort of become involved in the process as well. So really we're there to assist any type of family or any individual that's got a family or got assets and there's been a relationship breakdown. So that day to day is our role.
Yeah. Family law to me can often seem so traditional though, and how important is it really for you to think outside the box, particularly nowadays with the family makeup that you've just explained?
I think it's crucial because I think, well, if anybody's ever been through a breakdown of a relationship, particularly when they've been married or there's been children, there's lots of complexities. I got divorced for the first time. I haven't done it for a second time yet, but you never know. But when I got divorced for the first time, the thought of going to a family lawyer, even though I was one, was frankly terrifying because I just thought it would up the ante. It would just make everything much more real, much more sort of make it much more acrimonious, really, and there'd be more conflict as a result, which I wanted. I had 2 young children. I wanted to avoid that at all costs. And I think it's really, really important that we look at being there as a support and an advisor, yes, but not necessarily advising people in the traditional sense that you need to do this, you need to do that, this is what you can expect. You really need to think about what clients' priorities are in it as well.
Of course, and I suppose that all starts with the conversation. Yeah, definitely. Having been through a divorce myself, I know exactly how stressful and emotional it is, but these days there's so many other alternatives. Can you talk to me about what are the other non-court alternatives that are out there, really?
Yeah, and I think this is, for me, it's a big passion of mine. One, I don't like particularly going to court. I find it really boring, and I think because I'm a bit of a control freak, somebody else making decisions isn't it's not natural for me. But that aside, I think I think it's our main job is to try and keep people outside of the court process, because actually, for lots of reasons, it often gives quite unsatisfactory outcomes. It's a very stressful and expensive process. And I just think there is, most of the time, a better way. Of course, that's always going to have its place for some cases, but it should be the rarity and not the norm. But there's so many options now, and as part of my role is trying to bring those to the forefront and spread the word that they're available. So one we're seeing a real growth as a real growth area is the one lawyer, one couple process, which I specialise in, so I can act for both husband and wife, or mother or father, and they come to me with a view that they want to try and sort of sit together and work out what they want to do. They need some legal guidance as to what sort of thing they should be thinking about and what's likely to work, what's likely to be viewed as fair. But at the outset, they take the view that they're quite happy to deal with that together and hear that advice together. And it's actually really nice for us as practitioners, because if people are able to resolve that and still walk out of the office together, and actually they're still going to be okay, maybe not friends, but they're still going to be able to kind of leave and parent, particularly when they've got children, without there being all this bitterness and then upset. I just think it's so lovely to see. That's not always appropriate for everyone, but there's mediation now. I work as a mediator as well, which is similar, but you're there very much to guide people in making their own decisions. It's less advice led. It's more of being there as a facilitator to help people focus on solutions, really. But even if those types of processes aren't appropriate, or people don't feel comfortable with them, I think really our first port of call shouldn't be issuing an application at the court. It should be trying to work together with the other solicitor on the other side, having those early roundtable meetings. So couples have still got the benefit of individual advice if they think that's needed, and sometimes it's appropriate for that case for there to be that, because one person doesn't have the same understanding of the financial picture, for instance. But I would love to see more of that, and that's really what I push for. I think it's really important that we focus much more on what people can do.
Experience, how important is it to get maybe a prenup or a cohabitation agreement in order?
Yeah, I like a bit of pre-planning, because I always think it's easier to plan when you like somebody than when you don't. So I think it is really important. It's definitely more important in certain situations. So if you've got children, for instance, from a previous relationship, so you're on second time lucky, so to speak, I think it gives you some peace of mind from the outset as much as anything else. That you're providing for them, and nothing's going to change, and that you can still enjoy your new relationship without worrying about that. So I think for those types of situations, it's really important. Another big area where I don't think people realise it's important, but it absolutely is if you're just living together as a couple and not getting married, because there are far fewer rights for a cohabitee, if you like, than a married couple. So particularly if you're buying a house together, or again you've got children together but you're not married, then it's really sensible to have an agreement at the outset as to what your expectations are if the relationship were to go wrong. And as I say, people don't even realise, I think, that they don't have the same sort of rights, if you like, but they absolutely don't. So I think in those situations it can be really useful. And I would say it's an insurance policy. I've got one, so I'm on second time lucky. It's at the back of a cupboard somewhere that hopefully I won't ever have to get out, but if I do, at least I know it's there and can look back and think, well, that's what we said, that's what we knew was fair, really, and that's what we want to do, and it should make everything much smoother. If it goes wrong, hopefully it won't, but you never know.
But joking aside, that's something that didn't even think of. And I think for a lot of people, perhaps they don't think about it. So it's almost educating people to know, actually, if you are going to be living together, maybe not thinking about getting married in the future, it is something you perhaps need to do, as you say, while they like each other. Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
we say to people, some people ring me up and say, should I do it? And actually their circumstances and the way in which they're buying the property means that they don't need to. And that's fine. You say, actually, you don't need to worry until. But there are some other situations where you say, yeah, you absolutely should think about doing that now. It just depends. Again, it's sort of not a one size fits all, but it's good that people are aware of it and know what to do.
And is it becoming more common now?
Yeah, I think it is. I think as people are not getting married as often, I think people, they perhaps have been in a relationship before or married before, but are entering into relationships where there's not that intention. I think people think about it more in those situations. And again, if you've been married before, but it's second time round, I think people are much more sort of aware of what can be a fallout at the end, and they don't want that. So they're more in tune with pre-planning rather than sort of thinking about it after. So I think for those reasons, second marriage rates are higher than they ever have been, but also cohabitation rates and people not getting married are also higher than they ever have been. So I think naturally people are thinking about it more, but I think there's still education to be had, particularly when people don't know what the difference is in terms of what they can expect. So yeah, I think they are becoming more common, which is only a good thing.
And if they were, a couple wanted to get a cohabitation agreement in line, what would they need to do? Because, is it a scary thing to do? Is it a case of just picking up the phone? What would they expect?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the clients I do cohabitation agreements, I never meet them face to face because it's easy. It's actually, it can be all quite relaxed. People generally know what they want to do, and often it's one person is perhaps putting more into the property, and they both decided that they're going to respect those contributions at the outset, but then they want to share in. They still want it to be their joint property, but they just want to make sure that that's sort of ring fenced and treated in the way that everybody intends. And actually, because most of the time it is an agreement by nature, so people have to agree what's going to go in these documents. Sometimes there's a bit of tweaking, but it's pretty relaxed. It's a bit like people going and doing their wills. It's pre-planning for when you're not around, but in the same way, this is pre-planning if that relationship isn't going to be together and your circumstances change. So I don't think people feel too daunted by it once they've spoken to one of us and understand the process. I think they find that far less stressful than coming to us when things have gone wrong and they haven't done that pre-planning piece. So I think it's better for everybody to think about it earlier.
So you must have you must have dealt with a lot of clients, a lot of people walking through your doors. Without naming any names, can you share some stories of something that maybe is bizarre, interesting, or just funny, really?
Yeah, I think in our role we see I think people are at their most emotionally stressed, aren't they? It's never a good time for people. Having said that, I did have one lady quite a few years ago now that was the most excited divorcee I have ever experienced. I've never seen. She was just like a new woman from the day that she walked in the door. That she decided that this, and actually the trigger wasn't her decision. It was her husband had met somebody else, but she decided that was the best thing that could have happened, and she threw a party. I got a lovely bottle of champagne because she was just happy. She had an amazing spray tan from day one. It was just, she was.
Oh, that is funny.
People find it very difficult. I had a client they'd been married for 50 years. So they're both in their 70s. And my client who was quite funny, bit of a joker, she thought, well, she asked me if it would be appropriate to give her ex-husband, on the day that their decree absolute, so their final order of divorce, was made, a bag of sex toys for new girlfriend. So that was I've never been asked that before or since either, but it did make me laugh. So yeah, and on the other spectrum, I've had clients spit wine at me on an event, so not on purpose, but just just because they'd had a few too many to drink. So yeah, we have a few funny scenarios, because I think people are just generally a little bit more excitable than they would be normally.
Oh my goodness me, that is so funny.
Yeah, the sex toys request was definitely one that I will never forget. It was very funny.
The question is, did they give them the present or not?
She put it on the bonnet of his car.
Oh,
And delivered them.
I'd love to have been a fly on the wall.
Yeah, he was quite upset about it, and she said, "Oh God, it's only a joke. It's just a joke, you know." Yeah, she delivered the bag onto the bonnet of his car. It was very funny.
Wow. Okay, I don't know where to go with that now. So look, divorce, separation, as we've touched on, can be emotional and messy at times. Obviously not for that person, but anyway.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most important thing to keep in mind? You know, what's the advice that you would give through to parents, couples going through this?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think us as practitioners need to always keep in mind that we as lawyers are quite process driven. We understand the process, we know what needs to be done, and sometimes we're a little bit too transactional with it, I would say, naturally, just because that's the way we're trained. But I think in this area of law, you really have to be aware of where people are at in the process emotionally. Sometimes people just aren't ready to deal with a certain element, and that doesn't mean they won't be, but it just means they need a bit more time to get there. And I do think we need to be aware of our limitations as well. You know, we're not trained coaches, we're not trained counsellors, we're not social workers, you know, when there's really serious allegations going on. And I think it's really important for us that we know our limitations and point clients in the direction of other professionals that do have that expertise. And I'm pleased to say that is becoming more of a feature generally, I think, in our area of law, and certainly something where we think is very important. So we work alongside a lot of other professionals. But I think for clients, my top tips are always, you know, don't try and rush it either. You know, there's certain situations where I think people feel forced to deal with things very quickly, which is another reason why I'm not too keen on the court process, in that it's a one size fits all. Then, you know, everybody has to do things by a certain deadline, and again, one person might be champing in the bit to get things done, and the other person needs that little bit more time. But actually, if you take a slightly step back and different approach to it and think, well, what other process might be able to get them emotionally to the same page, or is it just a case of actually saying to this other person, look, we appreciate you want to move forward, we know it's important to do that, but you know, if we can just deal with that piece first and actually have a bit more time for the other person to sort of get their head around things, often that is necessary. So I think that open communication, I think sometimes people come to see us and it's very much one person on one side and one on the other, and walls are put up, and there's not too much open dialogue. It's all done behind the scenes, and that leads to a lot of the time to miscommunication and misunderstandings. Whereas if you approach it from the outset as very much trying to assist the client in coming to find solutions, and that can mean just understanding where the other person is coming from sometimes. I think that needs to be, that I always encourage that really early on, because I don't think people naturally think about it, understandably. You're in a slightly combative environment, but I think that can really help progress things ultimately. And don't worry that if I think some people say to me, I'm really sorry about getting upset. Actually, it's really healthy to get upset sometimes and let out that emotion and just be able to be honest with how you feel about things. I think that can help as well. So yeah, I think it's just people taking their time, just understanding that there is other help out there. It might not be their lawyer's the best place to do it, but we can help with that, and we should be helping with that and pointing you in the right direction. But also, as I say, just keeping that open dialogue from the beginning, and very much focusing on solutions rather than it being too much one side and the other. Which is what, I do think that's really important.
Yeah, well, that's good advice, really. Having been through it myself, it can be emotional and you can feel like the whole world is against you. But, like you say, it's looking at solutions, talking, and I think as well, giving yourself time. So it's really refreshing just to hear your approach of how you deal with it, with your clients is really refreshing, really. So common myths then when it comes to family law. Any common myths that you want to bust right now?
Yeah, so one of my, I suppose as family lawyers, we all tend to have little niches that we like more than others. I find children work typically quite draining and emotive, probably because I've got 2 children and went through a separation when they were quite young. So I find that I do deal with children work, but it's not a particular area that I enjoy very much a lot of the time. So whereas my co-head Anita, she loves that side of thing, and she's very good at it. So one of my specialisms, if you like, where I focus some of my energies, is the unmarried couples. And I think that one of the biggest myths is that people think there is such a thing as common law marriage, and the longer you've been in a relationship, the more rights you have, and it's just not true. But I think that is a biggie. So that's one. So there is no common law equivalent of marriage. So actually, as I said earlier, rights of a cohabitee are quite limited at the moment. Another myth, I think people just think that when they've got divorced, that's it. So if, for instance, you've agreed with your ex-husband that you're going to sell the property, divide it equally, and you just go ahead with the divorce process itself, I don't think people understand that the financials need to be finalised separately. Understandably, especially if you've agreed everything, but we always say it's very important to get the financial element finalised separately, because otherwise there's always the potential future claims, even if you've agreed it at the time. So it's just important to get it tied off. But that's a separate document and process to the divorce procedure itself. So I would say those are the 2 most common misunderstandings that people can have on that.
Do you think there's actually any merit, Laura, of educating people before they get into relationships, like early on, like schools maybe or something? Because unless you hit that particular moment in your life, whether it's divorce or separation, you don't know what you don't know. And then all of a sudden it seems like, wow, I wasn't expecting this. It's so easy to get married. It's so easy to live with someone. But when it goes wrong, it can go horribly wrong.
Yeah, I do. I think it's odd that we don't really have that. I think when more traditional marriages used to happen, and the churches used to do the reading of the banns and things like that, didn't they? I think that actually was partly an education piece, but more of a religious education than maybe practical. So I do think it's a little bit odd that nobody explains at the time you get married what that means legally for you, and what that's going to mean for your assets and things. But it's where the pre-planning is really good. And as I say, I think people that have been through it before often do come and find that out, what can we keep separate? What are, you know, the legal obligations going to be now? Just so I understand it. Is there anything I can do about that? So I think there is merit in it. I don't think many people do it. I think for cohabitants, it's even more important. And part of what I try and ram home daily here is that if people are buying a house together, then automatically our residential team should be saying, do you want to have a conversation with one of the family team, just so you understand what the implications are going to be. And that might be, yes, they do, but at least we've had that conversation, because a lot of the time they don't. I think, you know, one of them might have borrowed money from their parents to put down on the deposit. They bought it as a joint property, and they just assume that that will be repaid. But it's not, you know, unless you've documented it. But I don't think many people would know that, because they would just assume it would happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think early advice in those situations is really important.
And then finally, the last thing that I want to talk to you about is like reforms. You know, are there any areas, you know, of law that you feel could do with some reform?
Yeah, there's two. Well, there's one that I definitely think does, and there's another area that a lot of people do think needs reform, and I'm not so sure it does. So the first that I do think needs reform is quite how the court system works at the moment, in terms of if an application is made. I think that a lot of the time people make court applications, it is because either the other person isn't engaging in the process, or you've tried to sort it out and you haven't got resolution to it. You've just not been able to reach agreement. The first one, if people aren't engaging in the process, I think there should be standalone applications made for the information that is necessary. So it might be that they're not providing their financial information willingly. Now, I think there could be a standalone application just to deal with that element, because that would often trigger people to then engage in the process. But I think what happens now is that the general application is made, you get an order that financial information has to be provided, and then people are in the court system. So they don't spend that time looking at the alternatives. They just rely on the traditional court process, and it's a bit too much of a one-fits-all approach, and it becomes very stressful and very costly quickly. So I think if there was a standalone application to deal with the information gathering, if you like, far more people would then look at mediation or a roundtable meeting as an alternative to trying to sort it out, rather than just going along with the court process. So I would like to see that sort of change. One area that lots of people think that there does need reform is for unmarried couples, so that there are more rights for cohabitees, particularly when there are children involved. I'm not sure about that, because I think people make an active decision sometimes not to get married, and not to have those rights sort of forced on them, or those claims opened up. So, and I'm not sure that we should be imposing the same sort of obligations that there is on a spouse on people that just choose to live together. There may need to be a bit more flexibility in relation to the claims that can be made on behalf of children. I do think that perhaps needs looking at a little bit more. But for rights of cohabitees, I'm not sure that they should be extended too much, but I think a lot of people do feel that they should be.
Yeah. Well, Laura, thank you so much for talking to us today and enlightening us, really. There's lots of things that you discussed there that I didn't know. So thank you very much. And to our listeners out there, if anything resonated with you or you want to find out more, Laura and her team's details will be below. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, Laura.